DJ. So if music is a religion, which it is to all of us, DJs are the sermons and they're the pastors to this. And DJs are ambassadors. Greg, you're a fantastic DJ. They're the portal into this world. You've highlighted some DJs that we wanted to have a chat about to get us going, that really set new ground and set new scenes. So just maybe just cast the DJs you've selected here for the book, why you select them, and a little bit of color around what they brought to the scene.
Well, basically, you know, the DJs primarily come from the UK and New York. I mean, there's some fantastic books about the New York lineage. Tim Lawrence, Love Saves the Day, for example, and Life and Death on the New York Dance Floor, which deals with the early 80s. So a lot's known about the US side of things. Very little is known, you know, or much less is known about the UK lineage and the people that were involved in developing things here. I mean, you have somebody like David Mancuso in New York, and you're looking around 1970 as loft parties starting, the dawn of the disco era coming in New York, and you're looking around 1970 as loft parties starting, the dawn of the disco era. I'm repeating on myself there.
No, you're grand. It sounds great. To be sure, as we'd say in Ireland, it's grand.
Yeah. So, but from the UK side, you had stuff going on in the early 60s. I mean, the guy in front of me now is Guy Stevens. He worked at a club called The Scene, which was Ham Yard in London, in Soho, and that's where the mods kind of emerged from. And he was a big rhythm and blues fan, as was Roger Eagle over in Manchester at the Twisted Wheel. So these early 60s clubs are the kind of foundation. They were importing Black American music. They were getting the stuff direct from the States, opening those channels, which would later serve the culture in the UK so well. So, you know, also, you had somebody like Count Suckle, who came over from Jamaica in the 50s, and with a guy called Duke Vin, who started the first sound systems in the UK. And those two were right at the start of things. What people don't understand about Jamaica is that during the 50s, when sound system culture kind of really took off, the DJs, they were playing rhythm and blues. It was all American music. And it was because of this love of rhythm and blues that they went in and bastardized it into their own thing and put it on the offbeat. And this ska thing came out of it towards the back end of the 50s. And then into the 60s. So people like Guy Stevens as well, Count Suckle, were involved in bringing ska into London, and labels set up like Blue Beats and Island Records were very heavily involved in all this. So you're just seeing how the emergence of Black American music and also the Jamaican lineage coming into play into the 60s. And then as the 60s moves on, the reggae sound, the Trojan reggae sound comes out, which I'll probably speak about a little bit more in labels. And the skinhead movement emerges from that. There's also people like Jeff Dexter, who originally came from more of a rhythm and blues. He started playing, you know, at more psychedelic events in London, and there was a switch to that. Roger Eagle as well moved from the Twisted Wheel to a place called Magic Village in Manchester. He later ends up at Eric's in Liverpool and starting that whole scene that's going on there. So Roger Eagle is a massively important figure.
It was great that you touched on it. So like the Larry Levines and the American kind of set of DJs, I was so familiar, but I wasn't so familiar with the UK ones. And it was great that you touched back in the 60s, this mod scene, that feeding into Northern Soul and feeding into all of those insurge of American records. You know, it'd be remiss to say, what is the recipe, Greg? Is there a secret recipe for a good DJ? I mean, why did you particularly pick these DJs out in the book here in terms of what makes them so groundbreaking? What should people watch out for?
Well, either they innovated something particularly, or they're just pure obsession with regards to music. You know, I mean, Guy Stevens, again, who just popped up there. You know, he basically runs Sue Records, which was a massive early rhythm and blues 60s label. And later, you know, very sadly, he got jailed for a drug offence towards the end of the 60s. And while he was in jail, all his records were stolen, which must have absolutely devastated him. He had one final swan song. He was the producer of the Clash London Calling during the late 70s, but died not long after that. So, you know, he basically had so much to do with that imprint of Black American music, which really took shape with Tamla Motown in the UK, and that label started in 1965. It was a combination of the different labels that Berry Gordy owned in Detroit, and the Tamla Motown label, which was specifically British and European. You know, is an institution here. I mean, for me, that's the first disco music. That was the music that was being played in the discotheques in the 60s. It was the best music to dance to. So discotheque music, let's call it that for a moment before we get to the idea of disco, because disco was basically the music you dance to in clubs and discotheques. That was purely that, which was mainly soul and later funk, you know, so before the kind of disco era kicked in and the music became gradually more generic, it was basically the best of the Black American music. Plus, you know, a few other things fell into the pot as well.
I did chuckle about Jeff Dexter, who wasn't familiar with his career, getting barred and banned from a club because he was doing the twist. Yeah. So that'd be a great story, just an anecdote to share with the audience.
And then again, Jeff Dexter is the very first Glastonbury. He was booking all the acts for that. You know, he was an absolute cultural mavin. You know, he's there at all these kind of crucial moments, the UFO Club with Pink Floyd and all those things going on in 67. And so, you know, these people were doing stuff before David Mancuso and Francis Grasso and, you know, Larry Levan and, you know, everybody emerged from that New York scene. There was already a very serious lineage in place within the UK, you know, and this is one of the main things that I wanted to put forward, because I think people kind of tend to think or assume that the UK followed what was happening in New York in the
saying it predates it. You're saying it's the 60s. They were cutting that thing before the Loft, before Levine, before
collided in the late 70s with the idea of mixing culture, and New York disco music was coming through and starting to make an impact into an existing and a very deeply defined scene that was already in place. So, you know, that's one of the main things I wanted to get from the book, that what happened in the UK happened at a very, very early point, and people are very deep into music in this country. And maybe it's an island mentality, because the only other country that I've come across where people want to document to the nth, and, you know, they just go, is Japan.
In Japan.
You know, and again, it's an island, so maybe there's something to do with that. But the British have had a love affair with Black American music, dating way back. I mean, you can look at the Second World War and the Black GIs coming over and bringing the Lindy Hop or the jiving or whatever, you know, and people in this country seeing that and seeing the dancers. And
can I ask you as well? I mean, Greg, you're a very famous man. You DJ all over the world. Your shows are legendary, amazing. And there is the cult of the DJ. I myself would travel the length and breadth of the country to watch DJs, because they were the only ones that had those records, the white labels or the edits they had, or whether the cover-ups in the Northern Soul scene. How much of a cult following did these DJs have then? Were they hooked to one club and people just went to that one club? There were residents. How did it work, Greg?
Well, I mean, if you can't, you're touching on the Northern Soul scene, and I mean that's a good example, because it's the most kind of obsessive example, and you know, within that scene, it was literally about a DJ having a record might do it.
Yeah,
one record. I mean, I always heard about Ian Levine when he was at Blackpool Mecca, and the news went round he'd unearthed a track on Motown, as it was, called "There's a Ghost in My House" by R. Dean Taylor, who'd already had a hit in the UK, and what a great title straight away, "There's a Ghost in My House." And this was, everyone was scrambling to get this. People were going to Blackpool Mecca that week to hear "There's a Ghost in My House," this new tune, and it was as advertised. It was a great track. It later became a UK hit. A lot of people will know it now, but then it was unknown. And so I think for the next few weeks, people were scrambling trying to find copies of this, and without much luck. And I think the irony of that story was that a lot of the people who went to Northern Soul gigs, because they were all nighters, and they'd meet up in service stations. Yeah. And in those days, they used to have kind of racks of LPs, and there was a label, a cheap EMI label called Music for Pleasure. And somebody, you know, was just there after the night at the casino or on the way to the casino, wherever it was, looking through. There's an album, R.D. and Taylor.
Yeah, and there's an album track on it.
It's on there. It's on the cheap album. So this ultra obscure record, sudden available like right across the board. Brilliant. So, you know, it's a very strange kind of arena. I mean, the whole covering up aspect, a lot of things. I mean, most famously, you know, like the Frank Wilson, you know, Do I Love You? Did I Do was covered up, and you know, as Eddie Foster. Before people realised, and that was just to keep the exclusivity.
The activity of it, yeah.
Not that anybody found that record, because it's the last time.
But then it kind of ebbed itself later and kind of dance with dub plates and white labels and rarities, and you would follow DJs, you know, just because they were the only ones that had those records. They were the only ones that played your sound.